Welcome to episode 4 of Back to Beverly, and thanks for listening. I'd like to thank my guest on this episode, John Mirisch, for taking the time to join me in the studio to discuss his high school days and where life has taken him since. John is a member of a legendary Hollywood production family and spent years working in the film industry abroad before returning to Beverly Hills and quickly getting involved in local politics. He was first elected to the Beverly Hills City Council in 2009 and has served 3 stints as the mayor. He is currently running for a 4th term on the City Council, and we discuss more on that in this episode. Here it is. I hope you enjoy. All right, we're recording there? Okay, cool. Good in the control center. All right. My next guest is a member of a legendary Hollywood family that has produced some of the greatest films in the 1960s and 70s, including In the Heat of the Night, The Great Escape, Magnificent Seven, among others. He himself has had a long career in international film distribution, working for such prestigious firms as 20th Century Fox, Paramount Pictures, and IMAX. More recently, he has spent his time representing the residents of the city of Beverly Hills as a city council member and is running for a 4th term in this year's election. Please join me in welcoming to the show 3-time Beverly Hills mayor and current city council member and Beverly High grad class of 81, John Mirisch. John, thanks for sitting down with me today.
My pleasure.
So how does it feel to be back on campus? Did you get a bit of sense of nostalgia walking through the halls?
Always, but living in the community, I drive by here all the time. It's just wonderful to know it's here. I can't wait for the renovations to be finished. It's a fixture in our community. It's historic. Obviously I have nothing but great memories about the high school and love living in the still living in the community that I went to school. And not just to Beverly, I went to Hawthorne K through 8.
So all the way through the school system.
Yeah.
I know we were just talking before, and if you've driven through by the high school and through the city, you know that the front lawn is sort of ripped up right now, and we were talking that it'll be great to get that back eventually, sometime soon, hopefully.
Can't wait. It is such an iconic image of what our city is.
Yeah.
In City Hall, we've got a couple of pictures of the high school from 1928, and
oh, wow.
it's that same view.
It looks the same from almost 100 years
It looks
ago?
looks the same, and
Wow.
and may it look that way forever. It's
Yeah.
just glorious.
Well, I agree with you on that. So I mentioned in the open that you've been on the city council for 3 terms, running for a 4th term. Has your role on the council required you to be at Beverly over the years for graduations, other ceremonies, and the like?
Not officially, but yes, in a practical sense,
Sure.
because they're a major part of the community. We've actually had, and there will be, a candidate forum here, so come to that. But, I will sometimes come to football games and
Yeah.
that sort of, now hoping that we win a few going forward. But, it's fun to have opportunity to come back and see sometimes friends, the children of friends, and have that connection. There's always that sense of connection.
Sure. So you've been on the council for a number of years now. Did you ever consider a run for the school board before running for the council? It feels like some folks that have ended up on the council have spent time on the school board before, and that's why I ask.
I actually did not. I mean, I might have if it had been different. I lived abroad for many years, most of the time in Europe, or certainly all of it in Europe, most of it in Sweden. And when I moved back, was about to become a father, and with my ex-wife, we moved to Beverly Hills with the thought of growing up in the community I grew up in the schools. But that was, when Vincent, who's now in 9th grade,
Wow.
Before he was born. And so I didn't really think about that. I was actually seeing some of the changes that I did not think were for the positive in our community, started a blog. A lot of it was about overdevelopment and things like that. And so one thing led to the other, and a friend of mine said, hey, instead of just writing about it, why don't you step up and take responsibility and run for council? I did not have any notion or thought that I'd win, but I did get elected, and that's what started. So I didn't really, if Vincent had been a school age, I might have thought about running for the school board, but it was never anything that when I went to Beverly, I wasn't in ASB, I was on the newspaper, I was on the debate team. I never had thought about running for anything.
Yeah.
So just sort of one thing led to another.
Got it. So you just mentioned the newspaper. You were here in the late 70s and early 80s, and as I understand it, you were the editor during your senior year of Highlights, which for those listening is a huge honor for students that work on the paper. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like, working with and learning from the legendary Gil Chesterton?
Wow, Gil was certainly one of my favorite teachers at Beverly, and I had him for 4 years. I started Cub journalism in my freshman year and progressed. And he had an inimitable way about him. He was understated, he wasn't loud, but man, he knew what he was talking about. And I still carry lessons from him, even though I'm not a journalist. I do actually occasionally write articles having to do with municipal affairs, housing, and that sort of thing. And I certainly take the knowledge, all of that I learned from Gil and from journalism at Beverly with that. But a couple of classic messages that are as true as ever from Gil were, nothing is ever written, it's rewritten. That's true. And then he would sometimes make jokes that weren't so funny, and he would say, it's not funny, but it's timely. And so timeliness is, of course, also something very important. Gil was an amazing teacher, and I miss him.
Well, I appreciate you sharing those wisdoms from him. He was obviously before my time, but I knew the name, and so it's fun to listen to some things that he shared. So after you graduate Beverly, you decide to move back east and spend your college years at Yale in New Haven, Connecticut. Is it true that the best pizza in the world is in New Haven?
I like pizza, and everyone says Pepe's is where pizza was invented. I'm guessing it was probably invented in Italy, but the Italians might take exception to that. But yeah, there's great pizza there. Pepe's was a little bit off campus, so when we would go, we'd probably go more to a place called Yorkside. Very good pizza, and but I also enjoyed my 4 years at Yale. That was also an amazing experience, very different. You're put in with people from all over the country and all over the world, and of course the weather is very different from here.
Did you have any trouble adjusting to that, growing up here in LA where we sort of have perfect, pristine weather all year, and then going back to where it's a little harsher?
So it wasn't actually too bad. I'm not necessarily the outdoorsy type, which, as it turns out, of course, when I was a kid, my mom always wanted me to be out in the sun. It turns out being in the sun's not necessarily good for you. I'd be more interested in reading books or watching movies or something like that. But I do actually. I now that we're back in LA, I love hiking Franklin Canyon and that sort of thing. But actually, it wasn't too big of a problem. The Swedes have an expression which rhymes in Swedish that there's no such thing as bad weather, there's only bad clothing. And I think I learned about that both in New Haven and then, of course, in Sweden.
It's very funny. It's accurate, I would say. So having grown up in a family that was very heavily involved in the production of Hollywood films, when you were at Yale, did you choose a major that would put you on a path to sort of fall into that business? And what did you think you would do following graduation?
I think I took a major that probably put me on a path to do nothing, which was philosophy. But it was something that fascinated me, and it still fascinates me. It's something that I think helps you to look at things from various perspectives and to think for yourself. And there's also a Beverly Hills School District connection with that. There was at Hawthorne a shop teacher named John Weckerly, and he had on his desk a sign that just said, think for yourself. That was the message. It's a very simple message, but it's, especially in today, it's such an important thing. I actually had that sign recreated, and I have it on my desk now. And so I think that I looked at philosophy as helping me to think for myself in various different ways and looking at things from many angles. So, not that it would, that was sort of facetious about it, would lead you on a path to nowhere aside from maybe being a philosophy professor. I think any liberal arts background like that hopefully helps you to think. And I was always interested in the film industry. I wasn't necessarily interested, in coming back here, which felt like its own world. I was interested in living abroad. So I was able to combine those interests. I'd done a junior year abroad and moved to Europe and started off with a couple of small productions doing assistant-y kind of things, the assistant to the prop master, the assistant to the director, and that sort of thing. But it led to my getting a trainee job at 20th Century Fox in their international distribution division, and sort of one thing led to another.
Was there something in particular that prompted the move from the States across the Atlantic to Europe, or was it just that you had this desire throughout your life to sort of live abroad for?
So I did a junior year abroad, and I wanted to experience living abroad.
Sure.
I definitely did. And I ended up in Sweden, which is not a country that I had ever thought of moving to. I was sent there, but it was, sort of like love at first sight. I really took to it. Now, part of it may be they sent me there in the summer when Stockholm is one of the most glorious cities in the world. I think if they had sent me there in the winter, would it have been different? Maybe, maybe not. But I spent so much time in Sweden, and that I became a Swedish citizen. I have a Swedish passport, and I am very proud of that. I think there's a lot that this country can learn from Sweden, that their values are sensible, and a lot of those values, would like to say, informs my policy making at City Council. I do look at things, talk about looking at things from a different perspective, from a Swedish perspective as well.
Interesting. Is there something in particular that makes Sweden so special to you, other than maybe living there for so many years? And
the way that people are, it's just people are, I consider myself, and this maybe is also informed by that, I love community, as people who, will have heard, some of my talks will know, and I consider myself to be a communitarian. And Sweden, really, America's often about rugged individualism, and it's good, that's okay. But Sweden really takes the notion that we're all in this together, and it's almost like an extended family. It's a big family, and it's inclusive, and everyone can be a part of that. And that's how I look at community, and that's how I look at Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
There's not 6 degrees of separation in Beverly Hills, it's maybe 1.5,
Right.
and we're like a big family, and maybe sometimes we're dysfunctional. I mean, we've all heard, and I've used this on occasion too, that we're Mayberry RFD. Well, on our best days we are. On our worst days, we're, as a friend of mine likes to say, Peyton Place in an Ibsen play, maybe with some Shakespeare thrown in, but we're a community written with a large C, and we're connected in ways, and I want us to not only to explore those connections, I want us to extend them and to deepen them, and that's what makes communities special.
do you think Beverly Hills does that better than other small communities?
So I wouldn't say that. I think we do it in our own unique, special way. I mean, I like to think in their own ways, everybody, there's a Swedish singer who has a song that everybody is Jesus. I'm Jewish, so I don't think that, but I do think in their own way, everybody is Elvis.
Yeah.
We're all rock stars in our own ways. So each community in its own way is special. Each one is, Beverly Hills is certainly known throughout the world and has a standard, but each city in its or community in its own way is Beverly Hills or something else.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're better than anybody else, but quote Oklahoma, which was the play that I reviewed when I was on Highlights and that was done at Beverly. I'm not saying that I'm better than anybody else, but I'll be darned if we're not just as good.
So, following your move back from the States, back to the States, you quickly get involved in local politics, and you talked a little bit about it earlier, but can you expand a little bit about what sort of motivated you? I know someone had mentioned maybe be about it instead of talking about
Right.
it. And what did you see going on there in the city back then, outside of overdevelopment, or was that specifically?
I think it was mainly overdevelopment.
Yeah.
At that stage, there was a Measure H where the Hilton wanted to build this, at that time, this very unseemly tower that was just too big. That was
Sure.
actually the slogan that we used, and there was that riled up a lot of residents. And unfortunately, this is not just Beverly Hills. We see this all over the place, where communities are slowly but surely losing some of their soul for money. And this isn't about resisting change. Let's face it. Change is inevitable, but some change is good and some change is bad. And we need to be looking to try and promote the good kind of change. I mean, people who say that all change is good forget climate change. Now, that's not very good, is it?
Right.
So it was mainly about overdevelopment, and the city had lost a lot of its charm, and we had lost some of those businesses that we remember fondly as children, which we're now, with the Cultural Heritage Commission, which is something that I was a force behind, we're now rewarding them with something called the Golden Shield, where we're placing a Beverly Hills shield in front of the site of a business that no longer exists. So that's great. I love honoring our history that way. I'd love to honor it even more by keeping some of those businesses for this generation and the next generation.
Sure.
A couple of them that come to mind are, Edelweiss Candy Kitchen. That's a business that's still a small little business. It's not a chain. It's on, it's there on Beverly, and it's on.
It's on Cannon?
It's on Cannon. No, it's on
Yeah.
Cannon. Sorry, it's on Cannon. And when I was at college, my mom would, if I got homesick, my mom would send me a box of chocolates from Edelweiss, and I felt like I could taste home.
Yeah.
We need more of those kinds of businesses
Sure.
that people can connect emotionally to.
Nate Nels rings a bell.
Nate Nels is another
yeah,
one. I
yeah.
mean, we almost lost that, and
Right.
I, was very vocal about, wanting to do whatever possible that we could to save that.
Sure.
Nate Nels, you go in there, and I smell that, and I, like so many other people,
Right.
think of my grandmother. I'll
Yeah,
think
right.
about times that I was there with my parents. I'll think about, there's something so special about that. Proust had his Madeleines. We all have Nate Nels.
Yeah.
There's some things that are really meaningful and that should continue to exist. We just found out, even though it's slightly outside of Beverly Hills, that supposedly the Beverlywood Bakery is closing.
I saw that sad news.
And that, let's hope that someone comes along and saves that. But, these are pieces of our history and pieces of who we are that we're losing bit by bit.
Yeah. So pivoting a little bit, how do you think a city, and Beverly Hills in particular, attracts new investment and evolves in a way that's good for the city while also protecting and sticking to some of the zoning laws that prevent?
So I'm someone who...
Oh, must be the school bell.
Okay. So I'm somebody who does not think that that growing physically is always necessarily a good thing. Yes, we should grow spiritually, we should grow emotionally and in other ways, but our city was master designed in 1908 by Wilbur Cook, and he created a combination of large, very large estates north of Sunset, smaller single-family homes, medium-sized ones, and tiny ones, or relatively smaller ones, like where I live, which is south of Olympic, which I refer to as Baja Beverly Hills. But he also combined multifamily, and he combined commercial, and 65% of Beverly Hills housing is multifamily housing. Now, most people don't know that. And he created the commercial corridors in such a way that, because this was before cars were a thing, that people could walk to them. So I think that the design of our city as a master plan city is fantastic. And there are people maybe out there, especially in Sacramento, who want to eliminate single-family zoning, who think that single-family neighborhoods are racist and immoral and evil and that sort of thing. And I don't believe that at all. I think we're a combination, but I think the way that our city was designed was fantastic. And there's some stuff that we need. We need senior supportive housing, for example, and other things that we can do. But I love the business district, that when you walk there, it's still got that small town feeling. I wouldn't want to change that. So to me, what I would like to do, though, is I would like to attract the kinds of small businesses that aren't chains, that are like Edelweiss, that are things that you can only find in Beverly Hills. And I think the city can play a role in that, because commercial property owners are, in most cases, going to rent out to whoever pays the most money. And often that can be luxury brands or whatever. I think the city needs to continue, and I've been an advocate of this since I was on the council, for the city to land bank. And that means the city should continue purchasing properties throughout the city. And we have the ability, since we don't necessarily need to make a return on investment, we can do something for a civic benefit, for the benefit of the residents and also of the business climate, purchase properties where we can, for example, let's say there's some hip Australian brand. You want to come to the U.S., we'll give you a storefront and you can make this your U.S. headquarters, a kind of an incubator or accelerator.
Is there a specific fund within the city's budget that allows for purchase of real estate?
Well, we can do it from the general fund, absolutely. And I would dedicate more and more money to do that, because it's investing in our own city and allowing us to create civic uses that benefit us. We couldn't have free parking if the city hadn't purchased. All of the parking lots where you get free parking are city-owned. So there should be more of that. And as said, I would try to focus on allowing smaller businesses, new businesses, maybe as said, we always like to attract international and cosmopolitan businesses, but young brands that maybe haven't had an entree into the U.S. yet, and allow them to make this their headquarters. In addition to which, I would also very much favor looking at what we can do to encourage and attract entertainment industry companies. I think that's our sweet spot, and I actually mentioned this at a council priority setting session the other day, that I would like to propose that we form a permanent city liaison between the city and the entertainment industry.
It's an interesting point. I remember when we lost CAA, when they left the building there on Santa Monica and Wilshire and went to Century City, and I feel like once you lose them, it's hard to get them back. So to your point, it might make sense to have someone working to keep them or bring them in.
Well, or maybe I think we're not going to have a studio here. We're not going to build out the way Culver City has done. That's too big for us. But there is so much segmentation in the entertainment industry. Production offices, family-owned production offices, or small production offices, that's perfect. You'd think they would love to be in Beverly Hills because it's walking distance to great restaurants. It's a great atmosphere that we have here, and again, a liaison could inform us about what they need. Again, certain things, like if they need tens of thousands of square feet of space for studios, we're not going to be able to do that. But there are a lot of other things that we can do. And in fact, there are production companies that make their home here, and music companies, and still agencies. So more of that, I would say.
Well, I hope to see that implemented sometime soon. So obviously the former Robinson's May site has changed hands recently and will end up being developed eventually. And for those listening, I'm referring to the site that is on Wilshire at sort of one of the gateways to Beverly Hills, right across the street from the Hilton. As I understand it, you're an opponent to what's currently proposed at the site. Is that accurate?
Well, the council already approved. There is an approved project in place, and I did vote against. I was the only council member to vote against.
Got it. So what would be your vision for that parcel if you were to say, hey, this is what I think would work best at that gateway with that piece of property?
Well, I think Beverly Hills is an oasis. I think of us as kind of a low-rise, human-scale kind of place. And so for me, skyscrapers are not something that I generally like. Now, you could make an argument that's sort of on the edge of town. It's close to Century City. The closer it is to the golf course of the LA Country Club, you could argue that that is not necessarily going to set a precedent. I think something perhaps, not quite as high or impactful. I like hotels. I think our city hotels, and maybe more of a conference kind of center, again, done in a way that we avoid traffic, where we can have kinds of events like the Milken Conference.
Yeah.
That brings in an amazing group of people to town, and I'd love to see more of that. So it wasn't, I don't think that the project was all bad. I think maybe there would have been a way in which I could have perhaps at some point come to think it was okay. I also felt that the deal the city cut with the developer wasn't good enough. These were apartments or condos that are going to sell on average for $11.5 million.
Wow.
I wanted to have 2%, an additional 2% go into a fund for affordable housing. I think people who can afford $11.5 million, whatever fees they're paying, could afford an additional 2%. And we need affordable housing, especially, I believe, for our seniors, so that our seniors can age in place.
And how would that work? Does that go into a fund that then the city disperses to other developers to build affordable housing?
So what I would have proposed would have been, again, a 2%, additional 2% levy. And in fact, I proposed it so that it would have been after the first sale. It wouldn't have even impacted the current developer. And that money would go into a fund that the city has, and the city could work with, in general, nonprofit developers, because if you want affordable housing, this in general, this is a very inside baseball kind of world, and I'm very familiar with it. But let's say a nonprofit that's going to produce affordable housing and run affordable housing for seniors, and you'd work together with them, it takes money, of course.
Got it. Well, this has been an amazing interview, and I want to ask you one more thing before I let you go. So you recently kicked off your campaign for this year's city council election, which I believe is June 7th?
June 7th, and absentee ballots go out May 9th.
Okay, and you're running for what's an unprecedented fourth term on the council. There's also a measure on this year's ballot that would introduce term limits moving forward. I'm curious your thoughts on term limits, and what is it that motivates you to run as for a fourth term after I've already served 3 terms on the council?
Well, I think I'm a much better council member now than I was when I started. I feel in some ways I've gotten like a PhD in government. I'm involved in so many things and have perspectives outside of the city as well, for example, about what's going on with Sacramento and zoning, that I really don't think anyone else has. And I'm motivated because I want to protect our city. I'm motivated because every day when I wake up, and Joe Riley, who was a 40-year mayor of Charleston, South Carolina, said something along these lines, that every day when he wakes up, he thinks, what can he do to improve the lives of his residents? And I think every day, what can I do to make our community a better place? As said, I'm a communitarian. So I think experience does matter. And I think actually the fact that I have experience has informed new ideas that I have that have grown organically. And let me just give you one example is they asked us at a Chamber of Commerce forum, what would you do to bring in new young families into the city? And we know the schools have declining enrollment. And other people talked about affordable housing, probably not really knowing the actual technical definition of what affordable housing is. But my idea was, and I still think it's a good idea, and I actually have placed this as one of my council priorities would be to offer, the city is currently working on developing a preschool program with the BHUSD. So it would allow kids to transition there. Well, my idea is let's offer free preschool to all Beverly Hills residents and also to city employees. And you want to talk about being family friendly. You want to talk about doing something that will energize our city and will also allow people to be connected with the Beverly Hills Unified School District from an early age and families to connect with each other.
Yeah.
That's a good idea, and I've heard nothing but positive feedback to that idea. So that's just one idea, and as said, a lot of that is informed by the fact that I've been involved almost full-time doing this because I'm a communitarian, and because, as said, my goal is knowing that the system in many ways is rigged against us. We've all heard the expression, you can't fight City Hall. I've always felt you shouldn't have to. And so my goal has always been to try and be the voice of the residents at City Hall. One last thing is it's very possible, if I don't get elected, that you're going to have 5 council members who are from north of Santa Monica Boulevard. Now, you know, representation matters. Yes, we're one city and we all love the whole city, but 90210 north of Santa Monica is less than a third of the city's population. And I live in 90211, where very rarely have we ever had any representation. So representation matters. It's important to have a voice and a perspective who actually lives in that part of the city. I certainly would have nothing against district elections.
Yeah.
I think that would be a more relevant thing for the city to vote on than term limits.
Sectioning off parts of the city and electing a representative from each.
Just dividing the city's 35,000, dividing it up into 5 districts and letting each part of town have the person who represents them, as many other cities do, by the way.
Sure. You touched on this a little bit, but I want to ask you, and then I'll let you go. What would you say to the folks who think maybe it's time for a little fresh blood on the council, some new ideas? I know you mentioned that you've gained a lot of experience, and from that, some ideas. Is that what you would say? Like, you know.
Well, I think I think if you look at the campaign, at least up to now, I think, you know, without trying to denigrate anyone else, I think probably I've had as many, if not more, ideas than any of the other candidates. That's one thing. You know, the other thing is some of the people who are saying that, you know, maybe from other campaigns, you know, have actually, I've checked, have donated money to Dianne Feinstein for Senate in 2024. Well, that's going to be her 7th term, and she's going to be over 90 years. And you know what I think? If she can do it, so can I.
Well, John, I do appreciate the time today. It's been a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed this trip back to Beverly.
I love coming back to Beverly and hope to do it again. Thank you for doing this podcast, Dillon. We, you know, go Normans.
Yeah, go Normans is right. Till next time, guys, Dillon Curtis signing off.
Thanks again for listening. And just a reminder, if you enjoyed this interview, hit that subscribe button, leave me a review, and tell a friend. You can also find me on social, @BackToBeverly on Instagram. Till next time, I'm your host, Dillon Curtis, signing off.